Hi, good evening, and welcome to PyData Manchester for our August data AI ethics discussion. If you want to get in touch, ask any questions, and we certainly would encourage you to do that. You can tweet us at PyDataMCR. You can get involved on our Slack at PyDataUK-Slack, and you can message us in the YouTube comments as well. So yeah, please do get in touch. Volunteers and organisers of PyData Manchester. We've got Joe, who's handling the streaming and the technical behind the scenes stuff this evening. We've got me, John Carney, who's doing the streaming and talking. And we got Jennifer and Sean, who are going to be handling the comments and moderations. So they'll be around to answer any questions that anyone's got, and that aren't for the panel, of course. PyData Manchester is a professional event, so the code of conduct certainly does apply. PyData Manchester, it's a professional event, so please behave as you would do professionally. We try and be inclusive to everyone and harassment free, so please take this in mind. And if you've got any complaints or any issues, contact any of the organisers, or we've got the link to the anonymous support form there. So we've got friends of PyData Manchester, Open Data Manchester, Python Northwest, Herplus Data, all of whom have been running events over lockdown. I haven't spoken to them recently, so I don't know when their next events are, but they are coming up, and as usual, they will be great. Plenty of other. This is not an exhaustive list of PyData friends. We've got more friends than this, I promise. But there's lots of Manchester data meetups still going. We've also got the PyData Manchester podcasts. So coming out hopefully tomorrow will be our interview with James Fielder from Cox Automotive, which is really interesting. James is one of the organisers of Lambda Lounge, another Manchester tech meetup, and he's very big into functional programming and data engineering and how the two overlap. It's a really interesting conversation. If you're looking for a job, or you're looking to hire someone for a job, then please make an announcement in our #jobs channel in the PyData Manchester Slack, or get in contact with any of the organisers, and we'd be happy to put any announcements out to our broader audience. As I mentioned, if you want to get involved, we're always looking for speakers, podcast guests, sponsors, and when we get back to having physical venues, we're looking for physical venues too. Or if you want to get involved in helping to organise or being on the code of conduct response team, and give anyone a message. As we've got these different ways of contacting us here as well. So tonight's panelists, we've got Julian Tate from Open Data Manchester. We've got Professor Keely Crockett from Manchester Metropolitan University, and Olivia Gamblin from Ethical Intelligence Associates. But before we speak to our panelists, we've got Natalie Jameson from The Landing, who are very, very kindly helping to sponsor this event, and she's got Natalie to want to kind of share the message of what The Landing are doing around data science and machine learning and data-y stuff. So Natalie, over to you. Oh, you're muted, Natalie.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Natalie from The Landing. I'm going to talk to you about data-y stuff. The Landing, if you don't know, are a tech incubator. We have about 100 to 140 entrepreneurs all working in the advanced technology space. We've got lots of very cool kind of technology toys over there, all the way from 3D printing, VR, AR. We've got UX labs, etc., and we put on accelerators and incubator and workshops to help to accelerate the kind of Greater Manchester tech community. But obviously, with lockdown, some of those toys haven't been allowed to be played with for a while. But we're continuing with our online programs. So we just finishing the call that we ran for a data science and AI collab, which is a bit of a sponsored innovation sprint sponsored by GCHQ, where we take you through 12 weeks of product iteration with computational and engineering mentoring from GCHQ. But we're running these every 3 or 4 months. So I wanted to just shout out to say this sort of data science, AI led innovation collabs are something that we are continuing to do. So if you applied and you didn't get in on this one, just keep in touch. Particularly get in touch with me. I'll share my details afterwards, because we really, really do care about getting the particularly the Manchester is a national call, but the sort of Northwest community through these programs. So keep in touch on that. We're also running a fellowship program, which is for postdocs, which is around cyber resilience, but AI and data, and even from the humanities side as well. So particularly for tonight's panel, and Keely, we're looking for ethics, humanities type postdocs as well. But I also run or I'm on the advisory board for the University of Chester and the Institute of Coding, who are developing a new conversion degree in data science, AI, and entrepreneurship, which will be a conversion and also will be eligible for apprenticeship funding. I was trying to say. So you can pretty much get that fully funded as well through your company. So that's a really exciting program. So yeah, that's it. I also have my own business, which is called Citizen AI, looking at developing conversational AI. So I'm going to be posting some jobs for that soon as well. So I'll keep it all in the Slack channel because I joined today, but looking forward to the event, and have a good evening.
Thanks very much, Natalie. So yeah, thank you very much, Natalie. We're going to go back to the slides, and we'll introduce the panelists now. And I will stop sharing my screen. I don't know if they're doing that. So yeah, we've got Professor Keely Crockett from the University of Manchester. I'm sorry, Manchester Metropolitan University. I apologise. We've got Gillian Tate from Open Data Manchester. And we've got Olivia Gamblin from Ethical Intelligence. Sorry, it's going great. Yeah, hey, do you want to introduce yourselves? Start with Keely.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me to attend. So I've been working in the field of AI and applications now for about 24 years, so I'm really old, just so you all know, okay? And basically, in 2016, I did this European project, and it was about, it was called iBorder Control, and it had this automated deception detection system in it. And we had 3.5 years of wonderful times going through every ethics panel, every advisory board, getting approval, and everything was great. But actually, when you presented this to the public, maybe they weren't too sure and happy with it. So it started to get me thinking more about the ethics, the ethical side, the ethical use of application, responsibility, trustworthiness, and most importantly, the involvement of citizens and members of the public. So I'll stop there for now, and I'll hand back over to John.
Thank you very much, Keely. Julian?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for allowing me to speak today. So I'm from Open Data Manchester, which is based in Manchester, of course. And we're an organisation that's been going since 2010. And what we try so we're a not-for-profit organisation, and we basically try and build capacity and understanding in organisations, communities, and people who are interested in what data can and can't do, and also what are the challenges and opportunities of data. So we run a lot of training courses, and also we kind of develop projects looking at how data is constructed, not necessarily in a technical way, but in a kind of what is this thing called data? How do we describe things? What is the semantics of data? So we kind of work in quite varied areas, and we're at the moment we're working developing a declaration for responsible and ethical data practice for Greater Manchester.
Thanks, Julian. Olivia?
Hi, I'm Olivia. So I am the founder of Ethical Intelligence. You can call us EI for short, it's a bit easier. We are an AI ethics advisory firm, and our tagline is basically bringing the human back into the equation. So we sit at the intersection between academia and industry, and we're trying to bring all of the wonderful, rich research that's going on in academia in this field and actually bring it into practical application in industry. Beyond that, I myself am an AI ethicist. I have a couple different degrees in that, and call it my intellectual guilty pleasure, working through these different types of problems from an ethicist standpoint. So philosopher by
Excellent. Thank you very much, Olivia. I think it's probably the first person who's openly been proud of being a philosopher at PyDataMCR.
I try.
But I'm not trying to say that anyone's been ashamed of it, but they certainly haven't said it. So thank you. Welcome. It's good to get some philosophy involved, especially around ethics. So I think, first of all, to kick this off, I think a good first question is understanding what kind of work has each of you done around ethical stuff, and how that's impacted things that people viewing this might actually be how it might impact people's lives. And that can be from a developer perspective, it can be from being on the receiving end of ethical or otherwise data applications, anything you like. We okay to kick off with you, Olivia?
Yeah, definitely. So I will speak mainly from more of a business perspective here. We often work with tech companies that are developing different types of innovation in terms of AI, machine learning, all of the above. So we often work with companies that are conscious about their ethical footprint, so to speak, what kind of implications and impacts their technology is having on their user base, on society around them. So for us, it's very important to concentrate on that kind of end goal of how is this impacting the people that are supposed to use this technology and beyond. So a lot of my experience beyond the textbook, the philosopher's armchair, is working more on a business aspect. So looking at different business operations, how even the governance within a company works, down to the training of a developer team, in terms of the kind of issues and problems that sit, not issues and problems, but guidelines to be aware of, ethical limitations to be aware of when developing your technology.
Cool. Thank you very much. Julian, same question.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that we've kind of, I suppose, directly been involved with ethics and data, and one is looking at the kind of the fundamental, the fundamental existence of data, as in kind of how do we produce data and why do we produce data. So in 2008, early 2018, we worked with Disability UK and Age UK and Stockport Borough Council, looking at access to the city centre, the town centre. And what the problems we were looking at was looking at how is experience embodied within data structures. And actually what we find when we look at data, it generally is a manifestation of a dominant perspective. So people who sit outside that, people who have mobility impairments or who had different experiences of the built environment, were generally excluded from the technical systems that enabled decisions to be made. So what you were seeing was, though, even though people were working the best that they could, you were finding the underlying way that data was structured, how things were defined, was problematic. And so there's a program we've been working on through that kind of mapping mobility program, looking at various other projects that have been going on around the world. We've turned it into kind of developing a lexicon of experience. So mapping different experiences and seeing whether we can find commonalities to create these kind of codification of experience to help develop more aware systems that are aware of difference. And also we're working with in Manchester to develop this kind of declaration for responsible and intelligent data practice, which basically puts at the front it has primacy of that humanity, that technical systems and digital tools should not replace humanity. And what we find is that a lot of technical systems sometimes kind of move into that area where actually they are a replacement for humanity. They are a abdication of responsibility. And I think that if we kind of keep that to the fore, it's really important. And that's kind of it starts off this project, the kind of declaration that we've been developing.
Cool, thanks, Julian. Keely?
Okay, so a couple of things just want to mention. First of all, the project I mentioned at the start, this automated deception detection system, really resonated with Article 22 of the GDPR, the subject of automated profiling. And there was massive debate around the EU for this project. Were we actually automatically profiling somebody or not? And we weren't when it came down to the nitty-gritty and lawyers were actually involved in this process, because the systems that we have actually do calculate. For example, a traveller would do a pre-registration and they would do an interview with an avatar, and that their risk that comes from that was like 6%. And that was if the quality of the data was actually good enough to capture their behaviour. Essentially, the border guard got this information along with a whole host of things like, was their passport authentic or not, and then made a decision. Now, the reason why that was really interesting is because that's when I really got involved and started thinking about the ethics. So one of the projects we're working on at the moment is, we actually are working with Julian as well. He's going to smile now, thank you. Okay, is we got some funding to hold 2 round tables, one in Manchester and one nationally, on place-based ethics. Now, we definitely admit there's tons of stuff out there. There's loads of good practice done nationally and locally on ethics. But how do you actually get into small businesses? A message we've been getting back, I work with about 4 or 5 businesses, is that they're struggling at the moment with the GDPR. So then if we add on another layer of looking at the ethics of their practices and procedures, or even their procurement of AI, it's another layer that they can't afford. Okay, they're finding that quite difficult. So these roundtables were attended by GMCA, Manchester Open Data, Manchester Digital, and then we had another one nationally where we had the Office for AI, Equinox, Alan Turing Institute present, and the same message was coming out. The concerns are about data privacy and data ethics. Everything that Julian says in his declaration that he's doing, it's there. So what we're trying to do now is we're trying to do a citizen-led research programme in Greater Manchester to build a public auditing framework for auditing, so the public can actually see these systems, go into businesses, audit their practices. Don't worry, we do know about secrets and IPR, but auditing practices to see if they're actually looking at these ethical considerations in place. And we're currently just building up advisory and working groups, and people on this panel today, definitely we need you as well. So we want to bring people together. We think that if the public understand more and are more educated, and by the publics we mean all those underrepresented areas, the diverse groups, then we can build more trust with the public because their understanding will grow. And we also believe that businesses do need to understand ethics if they're ever going to be held to be accountable.
Sure. Cool. Thank you very much. I think that's a really broad range of experiences already. So I think this is something that you touched on, Keely. Who in our society, whose responsibility is it to both encourage or incentivize appropriate use of data ethics? Anyone feeling good about that one?
Oh, they're all looking at me now, aren't they? Well, this is a big question. So in any particular application of machine learning, AI, who is responsible? So if we go back to the self-driving cars, okay, who's responsible when things go wrong? Okay, so there are many court cases going on still about, you know, who is it? Is it the person who provided the data, the person who trained the algorithm, or the company? I think we all have a responsibility, but I think that where the gap is that we use this data for machine learning and AI. Are we really clear about, is it representative of the population that we want to capture? Is the quality good enough? But then when someone says to me, well, how many should be in my training and test set? Let's go down to details here. How many should be? There isn't an answer, is there? I believe responsibility lies with everybody, okay? But I think we have a duty of care to anybody who uses the technology to be as transparent as possible. I'll hand over now to somebody else.
Yeah, Olivia.
Yeah, I can jump in there and add the philosopher's bit to this. I actually worked closely on more responsibility in self-driving cars, so that one's actually a very fun spot for me. And to add off of Keely's point, it really is more of a group responsibility. The one thing to be cautious of in that case is if it's the entire group's responsibility, there becomes a tendency to be able to go, well, I wasn't responsible for this little part, and I can put the blame on someone else, because no one wants to be blamed. Everyone wants to be praised. And that's where we see kind of that gap problem that Keely, you were talking about, especially in terms of self-driving cars. The problem with that gap of not knowing who is responsible if someone is hurt in an accident or something is because we don't know who to assign the blame to. And as humans, we need that social justification, that righting of wrongs, to be able to say, okay, you ran over my foot, and so you pay to get my foot in a cast, that kind of thing. It's right and wrong trade-offs. So when you don't have that exchange, there's this feeling of unfairness, of an injustice being served, which is why it's a very important problem to approach, and why it starts to make the issues that we have in terms of these wider, larger, especially autonomous systems, why this problem becomes more complex, because there's not an easy, direct person to go, okay, you're the one to blame, you're the one that must trade, you're the one must punish, I'm saying this with quotations, but you're the one that must be punished for these actions, so that there's a fairness aspect taken back into account. One way to do that is with this kind of group responsibility that you're talking about, which is very true. It is everyone's responsibility at the end of the day to be aware of these issues, to raise a red flag when they spot something, because they're complex systems. You can't have one person always doing it. But at the same time, keeping that consciousness of, okay, we're all responsible, which means we're all responsible. So if one of us slips up, it's all of us. It's not, we get to pass this around and get to hide behind a group kind of responsibility.
Julian?
Yeah, I totally agree. It comes from the group, really, but also I think there's this urge. There's a universal ethics, and actually ethics can be cultural. And I think that it's kind of, we have. I would assume that we all have a similar kind of understanding of ethics, but that's from our particular kind of cultural perspective. And I think the universality of ethics is quite disputed. Just wanted to chuck that in there. But I think there's always this assumption that everything is kind of homogenous globally.
No, I think that's a really useful point. I mean, and both when systems are working to standards that we all understand and goals we all broadly think are useful, in that with the automated cars situation, while we may prefer different forms of transport, I think generally people are for the ability to transport people, goods, and services. And it's something we broadly understand. But of course, when we get into more nuanced things like how a widget in a widget factory works, like that's a very specialized thing that people need to understand. And there's lots of different motivations going on there. One, of course, being the profit motive. So when somebody is in charge of optimizing their profit, they're unlikely to also want to be responsible for the various ethics, as they can be ill-defined. So how, as a society, do we go about both? I mean, this could be a very high level or a very low level question from a policy or from a developer practitioner perspective, but how do we go about trying to enforce that and take some action on making sure that these things are abided by, that we do take action in trying to make sure we're not just we're taking into account the ethics rather than saying it is a group thing, as to Olivia's point. Go ahead, Keely.
I might as well start anyway. This is a bit weird. This is only because what I've read and who I've talked to. So one of the things is there's currently been out for consultation by the ICO an AI auditing framework, which looks at risk-based assessment of AI, which you're probably aware of. So it takes every single application separately. You do your risk-based assessment, and there is also a thing in there to be able to audit, to look at accountability of different elements of the system. Now, this is great, and it closed the consultation in May, and eventually this will in some form formulate new legislation and law. So eventually, but you know this takes years, you know, this will actually happen. But the question I want to know is that if it takes years to get through, and same with the European one that's currently maybe modify the GDPR, the question is, what do we do now? You know, how do we act now? Because I don't think waiting 3 or 4 years for a law to come through. If we're here because we believe that we have to do things ethically to benefit society. So I'll throw that open to the panel. There is frameworks in place, but how do we do it now?
Feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that law always, or statute always follows practice, doesn't it, in a sense? And I suppose GDPR came about after the original data protection regulations because it was found that actually practice wasn't being constrained by by those regulations. And I assume that as soon as the AI component comes into force, then it would be representing a situation that was 2 years prior to 3 years prior. So it is incumbent, I think, on. I mean, and this is part of what we're trying to do with the declaration, is people who want to do good by data, who want to do good by AI, who see that that some of the bad practices are not only injurious, but also they're stifling the development of good practice. And I think that there is a need for groups of people, a little bit like I suppose initiatives such as fair trade or whatever. You know, people who will abide by certain sets of principles, who come together, who kind of develop those and agree to work together. I think it's quite important. Then the legislation will kick in later on, because even GDPR is not really enacted as present. I mean, it's still to be tested. So,
Olivia?
Yeah, just to add in there as well, there are many frameworks going into play, policies being made. There's a lot of movement going on in this field in terms of legislation, regulation, which is great. And like we identified, though, there's a delay. And so a lot of the work that I do actually is to advocate this narrative change around ethics. A lot of times I find when I approach, again, as a philosopher, when I approach a programmer, I'm like, ethics, they run in the other direction. So it's changing this narrative, because ethics is viewed as a blocker. It's like, the way it's been framed is it's a hindrance to innovation. As soon as you say, oh, well, we need to consider the ethics, then immediately the person on the other end is going, well, you're just going to tell me I can't do this fun, cool thing that I wanted to do. It's like, no, that's not actually the case. Ethics is actually a very useful tool. It works both in the sense of a risk mitigator. It allows you to catch these red flags, these important decisions that will, if they click the wrong way, will blow up in your face on the other end, years, months, days down the line. So in one way, it's actually a very strong tool to help risk mitigation, which of course leads back into, well, if you have a stronger, more robust system, that's better for your profit and so on and so forth. But actually, as well, ethics is not an innovation hinder. It's actually a stimulus for innovation. It provides these guidelines. You hear, you have your technical limitations when you're approaching a problem. You're like, okay, I can go about it with these kind of solutions. I have these technical limitations. I have to fit within this box, and then you have to get creative to how do you fit in that box. Adding in the ethical considerations, the ethics, just defines that box in 3D, we'll call it. Instead of just this 2D box, you've got a 3D box now. And so what happens on the other end is you actually have a far more robust system. It's the innovation that goes behind that, because you have a couple more guidelines. That's all. A couple more guidelines in place. Then you have to get even more creative. So you're no longer complacent going, okay, this is the best technical solution, done. This is the best technical solution, and it's the best solution by the people, by the end users that I want to reach. Now I've reached the right solution. So a lot of what I am a huge advocate for is, yes, we need these regulations, we need these laws, they're catching up. That will help keep a lot of the chaos down. But for the meantime, in between, is changing this narrative around ethics from being a blocker to something that's actually very, very useful, very, very useful tool in the entire toolkit.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to add that, I think ethics should be an enabler because we should all want to act ethically. We've only seen in the last week or two regarding, I mean, this isn't to do with AI, but it's the use of data, and it's obviously the GCSE and A-level results, where you actually had young people outside staging demonstrations saying F the algorithm, and you think, actually, is it the algorithm, or is it just the way things have been implemented? Is it the design process? And you're starting to see more and more stories in the press. I mean, this is prior to this as well, this distrust of unseen algorithms, AI. And that is precisely the problem that the people who want to do good by data, who want to act ethically, are trying to avoid. Because as soon as you lose trust, then it's not doing anybody any good.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think from what you're getting at, Olivia, my takeaway from that answer is we can help build better solutions that actually solve the problem. And to Julian's example, what is definitely a very difficult, tricky situation around A-levels and GCSEs, this did not solve the problem at all. It introduced a bunch of other problems, which it seems like people had already flagged, but that's a different conversation. So with that in mind, this comes to one, I'm not sure who mentioned it earlier, around, what was it? What the, whose responsibility things are around, algorithms, because 20 years ago or whatever, we may not have been having this discussion because the compute power, the ability to do to make these decisions on such an automated scale wasn't available in the same way with Facebook and all these various things. So even when it comes to deciding what the algorithm should be, there's a new level of responsibility. So one of the things that I found myself asking, and when I spoke to other people they've also had, is understanding what kind of problem we should approach. If this is something that we should be saying, okay, a human did it before, we can now automate it and replace it using such and such an algorithm and such a setup. It can introduce new problems. Now, is it worth contrasting with what a baseline, these are good values that we think we should be adhering to, as opposed to this is how it was done before manually with somebody who was possibly responsible? So in an example of this might be automated drone strikes, in which there is a diffuse responsibility, and it can be hard to determine when a very damaging, lethal attack could have been taking place. Whereas other situations where we've got someone like Marine A, who went and killed someone, and the system wasn't in place to hold someone accountable in the same way. And I think in both situations, there's ethical questions about whether that's morally or ethically right. So yeah, how do you compare ideal ethical situations to a good benchmark as opposed to a human system that's also working? I hope that question makes sense. Any volunteers?
I can take a crack at it here. I think I got it.
Okay.
So, okay, I'm going to approach it like a philosopher as well. So I'm going to take a crack at it, and I'm approaching like a philosopher.
Be proud of it.
I am proud of it. We approach machines, so to speak. I'm just going to put a blanket term and say machines. Obviously, there's a lot laden in that one word, but we approach machines differently than we approach humans. A human we're much more lenient towards, because we have this concept of, okay, you are human. You have the ability to mess up. You have the ability to make a mistake or things go haywire. Whereas with the machine, there's this or the systems, there's this concept of, well, this is supposed to be the perfect version. So of course, you should know better, and you should be able to, well, you as in the machine or the system, you should be able to do better. You're supposed to capture the perfect picture. You're supposed to capture the perfect version of ethics. Well, all of these machines and systems are still built by humans. So it's not like we're creating something godlike. We're just taking what we already have and nuances about our humanity, and we're amplifying it. So I think, coming back to what you had asked, John, as well, the implementing AI systems, machines, and so on and so forth, it's a great opportunity for us to look at how we currently do things, and is there a better way in our idea? Is there a better way that we can do it, to challenge how we have kind of ingrained things in prior systems, systems as in societal systems. But it is something to be very aware of, that the little teeny decisions, that it's fine when one person makes it, because we can act retrospect. When that is added into a system, it's going to be blown up into larger proportions. It's going to reach many more people. So I took a crack at it, and I hope that helped. I hope I got it at what you're trying to hit at there, John.
Yeah, I think so. It's communication scale as well. Sorry, Julian, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, there's a I don't know whether everybody's watched Little Britain. There was a series a few years ago called Little Britain, and there was a sketch where someone said, there was a character who went, the machine says no, and that was their response to everything. But actually, what I think what's interesting about that is, I think what we may start to see, especially within public policy, is how there's an abdication of responsibility to the machine. So bad policies get encoded into an algorithm, and that makes the decisions, and it creates a kind of plausible deniability to the policymakers, because they can say, well, it's the computer, and it would normally be a subcontractor who would be developing that, will be developing this, and they will get all the blame, and there'll be a plausible deniability within the legislature, a kind of fire and forget kind of mentality. And I think we saw this there was a very dubious test called the TOEIC test. There was about 2016, where foreign students were made to take English tests, and basically this algorithm was set up, and actually it was wrong. It flagged up, I think it was 20% of people who took the test as they were cheating, and they got deported. And then it was found out that this algorithm was wrong, but this algorithm was a manifestation of a policy, and those people had no recourse. And I think we have to be very careful of that. And I do think that we're starting to see it more and more, actually.
Sorry, go ahead, Keely.
I just wanted to say I fully agree with you, Olivia. That was a great explanation, by the way. I also think when we compare against the baseline, if we take a human who's an expert and we say to them, you know, tell us how you did it, they might explain it in one way or two ways. We question it, they come down to a different level. And I know transparency and explainability of AI has been going on for ages and people are trying to come up with loads of solutions. But one of the things I say is that it's okay producing an explainable algorithm, but who's it explainable to? How do we understand the decision? So for example, we can apply tech. We can say, right, this neural network kind of works like this. But if you actually take it to the user, the person in the street, the member of the public, they won't have a clue about what you're saying. You say, oh, it's doing this parameter, that parameter, it's taking this weight, and they won't know. So the question for me is, how can we get that explainability down to a level that the majority of the public can actually understand how these algorithms work? And I think going back to the A-level algorithm discussion, I think it's really interesting because does anybody actually know, or anything's been published about how the algorithm actually made those decisions? And the answer to that is probably no, because it's going to then be hidden under trade secrets. So there's another problem as well. We may not get to know because, you know, it violates, or the company might lose their IPR. So it's scary times.
I think one thing to compare that with is there is a hidden system which works on a huge scale. But when you compare that to the welfare systems over the last 10 years and how people have been, there's been policy decisions made to exclude a lot of people and to reduce the support offered by the state, in which there's often no recourse, or recourse can be very difficult and painful for people to go through. Now, and normally those decisions are made by people as opposed to computers. And I think it comes back to Julian's point about having recourse to kind of challenge decisions. So is this an ethics thing, or a broader ethics thing, or is it a data and AI ethics thing? And yeah, who should be responsible for that? Is it developers or is it policymakers?
I can chime in there real quick, actually.
Yeah.
One of the things it hits on from an ethics standpoint is this concept of agency and the ability to have a say over what's happening to you. And so a lot of this frustration in terms of the algorithms, like we saw with the A-level, was the algorithm was given the final say, and the end person, the person that the decision was being made on, had no agency over that decision. They couldn't say, well, no, you're not taking the right considerations into account because I have no idea what considerations you took into account. And so it takes away this feeling of agency. So from an ethics standpoint, and data ethics, AI ethics, tech ethics, whatever ethics you want to group this under, one of the big principles that this kind of frustration is hitting on is the fact that we feel like we're losing our agency a lot of times in these kind of situations.
So is that something that developers or practitioners, people who are actively building these type of things, can try and incorporate? So whenever you're building something, to try and incorporate some level of agency.
I think it's a very important thing to consider throughout the process. Where I think the main change is going to be seen is actually on a policy level, is different mechanisms put in place where people can challenge systems and the decisions made on them. Right now, there's not much you can do. And that really comes from more of a policy regulation perspective. It's amazing if developers are considering this and building into their user interface. Oh yeah, I can say, I disagree here, kind of thing. Again, that's a very poor example, but it is something to be considered by developers. I think the real responsibility for this, though, is going to be in the policymakers, from my opinion.
Okay, that makes sense. Got a question from Trello, from the Slido. So from an InfoSec perspective, there's a history of complex and costly frameworks that people have gone to great lengths to try and understand and define. Often these are ignored and implemented poorly with unnecessary cost. Are there any lessons for this from this for AI ethics?
I can jump in there again.
Yeah, feel free.
You don't need to reinvent the wheel, a lot of that extra cost comes from people going, okay, we're going to scrap everything. We're going to do this all over again. There's actually a lot of pieces already built in, especially speaking from experience. A lot of companies have risk policies. They have different due diligence systems already built in. Just looking what's already there and then adding on just the few little pieces that are extra. Not extra, the few little pieces that have yet to be addressed in terms of the different ethical principles will make a difference and will cut down on that insane cost that I know can be acquired when you're looking at creating these very robust frameworks that then just end up as a checklist in someone's bottom drawer. It's building it into the day-to-day processes, the day-to-day structure of the company, and coming from a cultural aspect as well, creating that company culture where this is a good thing to follow, and that you get a pat on the back when you do this.
I agree with that, actually, because we do seem to have this kind of what tends to happen is we tend to rubbish systems, say, right, that's bad, we'll start with a new one, without actually learning what was good. And almost like you kind of you destroy to just as the sake of just getting it out of the way. New person comes in, we're going to do things differently now, gets in a new system, new ways of working, whereas actually as ethics have evolved over thousands of years, so systems have to evolve. You can't just kind of, because there will be good bits in many systems. And I think what Olivia says is kind of, as long as you know where you're going and you just add to it and you adopt things, you will eventually get there. Obviously, unless there's something really grievous, people dying or whatever. But it's that kind of a little bit more intelligent, I think.
So it's a lot more about. Sorry, go ahead, Keely.
Oh, sorry. It's only a quick one. I just wanted to agree with both of you as well. And I found with my first large project that it was all about looking at the existing data privacy impact assessment. And as I said, most of it's already there. Your data governance framework in your business, which should be already in place to some extent, and just adding in those extra elements. So basically, not looking at AI ethics maybe as separate. If you've got something that works in your SME, then taking that and then just adding in the extras. So fully agree with Julian and Olivia.
Excellent. I'm glad we've got consensus.
Can I also just add? I mean, if you're an SME, I mean, a lot of these, you look at kind of some of the things that you're told to do, and you think, oh, how am I going to do this? It looks really onerous. But actually, is if you kind of, as long as you know, as I say, the direction of travel, then as you become bigger and bigger, then you start adopting more and better practices. They should stand you in good stead. Because I think, I'm sure a lot of people who were working quite ethically earlier, before GDPR, actually saw the benefits of it when GDPR came in, because they understood that they were operating in a fair and trustworthy manner. So,
I mean, would it be fair to say then that one of the lessons we can take from these large frameworks and how they've been applied to very important things like InfoSec, it's a cultural thing. It's a slow progression. I mean, like you alluded to, Julian, there are some circumstances in which you want to have a very high benchmark or threshold beyond which you're not going to release your product. Say for example, driverless cars. But for a lot of other things, you don't have to have such a high threshold if it isn't a life and death situation. It's an incremental thing, and that's something that for SMEs or in entrepreneurs, when they're building stuff, you don't have to worry about it all at once. Just do bits and pieces. It slowly evolve.
And can I add in there real quick as well? I'm going to speak in philosopher technical terms. There's this concept called moral maturity. And what that basically means is over time, our moral understanding, our concept of ethics matures with us. Works the same in companies, works the same in systems, works the same as society. For example, 100 years ago, women couldn't vote. Now we can vote. And that is just an example of over time, society matures in our understanding of what is good, what is bad, but so do companies, so do individuals. And so going at it with that kind of thought process of this is a journey, this is something that I have to actively work at. and can continuously work on, but also I can know that it's okay that I didn't know this before, I'm knowing it now, and now I'm acting on it. So that gives a bit of a forgiveness towards the self and encouragement to keep going forward and keep building and keep adjusting and readdressing.
Cool, thank you.
Sorry, I think that calls for a bit of moral maturity in the individual and the CEO as well. Really.
Yeah, I mean, this needs to be the kind of thing that people are incentivized towards. But to Olivia's point earlier on, if this helps to solve the broader problem, and hopefully if CEOs can see that, then that's going to help them and their profit margin too. Hopefully. Got a question from Rika. So is it known whether the algorithms that are uncovered as unethical are actually less ethical than the previous human decision making they're automating? Is that something we can understand on a broader level? Is that what should we do about it if that's the case or it's not the case? Anyone free to jump in, or I'm going to pick someone. Keely, you've been quiet.
Oh, I was doing well then, wasn't I? I think one of the things is unconscious bias, okay, and the bias of an individual. And we sort of like made a case that if a human makes a decision, I'm going to take my example of a border guard. If a border guard makes a decision on whether to let someone through or send them for a settle line check, it's been true from the work we've done. If that border guard has had a bad day or he's had a bad experience, he might be a little bit more snappy. Okay, so you've got that issue there. We've also got the unconscious bias coming through as well of an individual. It may not happen, it may happen, but it can actually influence the actual decision. So I don't know. I think it's a difficult question, really. I wish I could give you an answer, but I will throw it open.
Olivia, Gillian, either of you?
I can go as well. Again, unconscious bias in persons and in systems as well. We'll see it surface in both. And if I heard correctly, this was for specifically COVID technology, or I think I probably misheard part of that question then.
Just in a generic technology.
Clearly, I have Corona on the mind, considering it's everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
No, with that in place, that is a tricky question. There's always going to be bias no matter what. Depends on how it comes out and who it is affecting, and how you're aware of it. That's really kind of the key changes there.
So, I mean, I think this comes back to... Go on, Gillian.
I think it comes back down to that whole idea of accountability. It always is that, say, an individual who presses the fire button on a drone would always seem to be more accountable than an algorithm that's targeted somebody themselves. And I think it is down to that kind of, well, the human has agency, therefore they are culpable. Whereas an algorithm doesn't have agency, it's just a manifestation or an embodiment of something prior, which may be a group of people or a policy or something.
So go on.
Sorry, but I have to bring out one of the most controversial things this year: face recognition. Okay, IBM have scrapped it. What do you do in a drone strike where you've got a camera to identify a person in a dark room in order to take them out, but the lighting's bad, the quality's bad, but that algorithm makes a decision anyway, and it's 85% accurate. That's where there is a big issue, and that's maybe the right and wrongs again, where I don't believe at all that this sort of thing should happen, but it does. So I just wanted to bring it face recognition because that's a great one to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of, I guess, algorithm explainability and agency, is that something that the entrepreneurs or SMEs can start trying to balance off in product development, of making sure there is a method of agency while also trying to make sure that algorithms are explainable without revealing IP.
I think I've heard talk of having vetting processes or these kind of safe processes where algorithms can get analyzed, where they're kind of contained. But I'm sure I've heard of that. So the IP is preserved, but that may be just me mishearing something.
There's also been some work done where you can actually analyze the data used for training and testing, and it kind of like you feel as IBM was part of this larger project with the university in the States, but it was all about trying to, like your washing machine gets an A or an AA grade for efficiency. It was all about trying to measure the efficiency of your data set to train and test your algorithm as well. But you see, there's lots of these ideas coming in, but there's nothing absolutely set in stone.
I mean, that sounds like a really interesting idea, but how do you know what's good data for what's representative data for your problem set?
Exactly.
Okay. I thought you were going to great answer for me there.
Oh no, I could give you an answer, but again, it's research, and it needs to be much wider studies that are conducted, and maybe there isn't an answer.
Yeah,
I don't think it's just about the data quality and the amount of data you have. It's about the ethics as well. It's that other layer before you get to the data, I think.
It's unlikely to be a silver bullet. It's a problem we've got to deal with.
Yes.
Olivia, were you going to say something?
I'm just nodding along at this point, giving thumbs up and just agreeing at this point.
Excellent. Okay, so we're close to the end of our time, so I've got one more question from Anonymous, maybe from the Slack channel, I'm not sure. So accountability, both in the government and private sector, depends on an engaged and informed public on issues of data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. Sadly, that's lacking. I think accountability is lacking in a bunch of areas, to be honest. But yeah, how can we start to address this? I guess both from a policy perspective at a high level, but also how can we in this room start to address this? Julian.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I do think there is a need to bring up a broader awareness of data and how data affects the individual and their communities. But I think there's always this assumption that everybody has an infinite capacity to learn, and actually, it's not the case. People don't have time. People are doing things which are probably more important, like feeding kids or earning a living. And so, I do think by creating kind of trusted intermediaries, I think we might start to see this where there's kind of organizations who can vet, who are trusted, if anybody trusts anything anymore, and who take on that kind of burden of saying whether things are right or wrong. But whether that work or not, I'm not sure. Whether they'll be trusted or not.
Yeah, there's different problems there as well, isn't there? Keely.
Okay, just two things, right? So I do believe the public are key. I know I keep mentioning this today, but I'm talking about our ordinary citizens. And for about the past 10 years, I've been going out into communities. So not saying, oh, come to an event here. I've been going out to their community centres. I know it's Manchester and in the Northwest, and talking to them. And, sometimes people want AI explained like the Terminator. Arnie, that's what they want to understand because that's what they resonate with. Yeah. Because that's their age group and that's what they've seen. They only want to know about movies. Some people are clued up, but most of the people in the far-reaching communities have never even heard of AI or data or what does it mean. I've applied for a payday loan but not got it. Why? I can't feed my kids. That's all I care about. No one's just sat down and think, well, why haven't I got this loan or why didn't the bank help me? So I think we need to do lots more grassroots. I'm committed to doing that as a volunteer because I do volunteer stuff because I really think it's important. The other thing as well for Manchester is the 4 universities led by Manchester Metropolitan have just got ERDF funding for the AI Foundry. Now, this is great because this is designed to help SMEs and entrepreneurs with a variety of things to do with AI and machine learning. It's all funded, so there'll be a call out. The launch will be very, very soon. But part of that, we've got some ethics practice as well that we can do some training. So we want to talk to you. This is all like just from the funding. So Olivia, we need to talk to you about this. Yeah. So that will be available and launched, and that's open to anybody as well who can just go along. So it's like it's a bit like a Kickstarter, but it's funded by ERDF. So that will be coming soon as well. AI Foundry.
Excellent. Olivia.
That's really exciting. And here is just a shameless plug for the role of an AI ethicist as well. The fact that these problems are very complex, and it's hard to always have them at the forefront of your mind. And it can weigh down teams, especially when they're going, did I make the right decision? Especially teams that want to do good by their technology. They're stuck in this kind of moral ambiguity of, did I make the right decision? Was I doing this correctly? What will the impact be? An AI ethicist is really there to help both relieve that burden and help keep an eye on things. They're not there to be the mothering figure that's like, no, you can't do this. You're going to go to your room. That was bad. They're really there to help support. And they're trained. We're trained in actually these various different principles where we have the mindset of how to sit down and talk with you through it and understand, okay, these are the decisions being made. These are the potential impacts. Are we considering everything? It really is that kind of mindset to be able to go into a situation, talk details with a programmer, be able to abstract that out to these larger, very kind of vague principles as they are now, and then bring that back down into a set solution. And AI ethicists are trained in that. We're trained in that kind of thought process. So having the ability to consult with one or work with companies that employ experts or AI ethicists to help with that, or employing your own AI ethicist, it really does wonders in terms of helping with that sense of accountability. The ethicist does become that source of accountability for a lot of this. We take that on full eyes wide open, but we're there for that. We're there to help take that accountability. We're there to help. So that's my shameless plug for my own profession there.
Cool. I think it makes sense. I mean, as someone who works in data science, there is a huge amount to learn and know about already. So understanding all the ethical implications, well, I think it's certainly worth thinking about and spending time on. I'm not going to be an expert. Yeah, I think it's something that we all need to be working on. With that, we've overrun slightly. So thank you all very much for joining us and answering so many questions. Thank you very much, Natalie and The Landing, for so graciously sponsoring. And thank you all for tuning in and watching and getting involved. We'll be tweeting out. The YouTube will be staying on for indefinitely, I suppose. If you want to come back and refer it to anyone, we'll make sure we've got the Twitter accounts for all of our guests or other social media they want to plug. So yeah, thank you very much for being involved, and we'll hopefully see you next time. Thank you very much.